The people who have really started using Claude all the time just seem to make fewer dumb mistakes, as he put it. Like they just have what he called a computational guardian angel watching over them, where they can basically be consulting this chatbot, maybe dozens of times a day.
Yeah, well, I'm sure a lot of people are hearing that and they're thinking, oh my gosh, we're already letting the AIs make dozens of decisions a day for us. We're in a lot of trouble here.
Yeah, totally. And there's something that terrifies me about this world. Yeah. Some very smart people are walking around San Francisco basically outsourcing their cognition to this chatbot.
All right, Kevin, well, I got a note from you saying you wanted to talk about Claude.
Yes.
And I assume you mean the founder of the French impressionist Claude Monet.
Not quite.
Who? Oh, so you mean the other Claude, the chatbot one?
Yes, the chatbot Claude from Anthropic is something that I've been writing about this week because, Casey, this chatbot is taking San Francisco by storm.
It really is, and I loved your column about it, and I think it is time to cast a little bit of light on a chatbot that is definitely much less used than some of the more popular ones, in particular ChatGPT, but as you note in your column, has to develop a really fervent following.
Yeah, so I first started thinking about this column back at this AI conference that you and I went to together in Berkeley, where I was just talking with people about the AI tools that they're using in their daily lives. And over again, I kept hearing people who are in the AI community, many of whom work at AI companies, tell me that they were all using Claude, not just for help with their work or for help writing emails, but really as kind of an emotional thought partner for themselves and a problem solver in their personal lives.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of conversations are they having?
So I've talked to a lot of people who are sort of Claude power users. And what I was hearing from people in this community is that Claude has become a kind of social sidekick, that it helps them navigate relationship challenges, think through major life decisions that they have to make, maybe help them in an argument or a dispute with a friend or a loved one or even a romantic partner, that it has sort of become this all-purpose social helper for them. And, this is something that you and I have talked about in the context of these AI companionship apps like Replica and Character AI. But this feels different to me for a couple reasons. One is Claude is not built for AI companionship, right? It is a general purpose AI model. Anthropic has not specifically designed it to become friends with people or to help them in their social lives. This appears to be kind of an off-label use of this model. But it also struck me as remarkable because the people who are falling for Claude the hardest, at least in the circles that I'm seeing, are people who work in AI, are people who know that these systems are not sentient creatures, that they are just sort of next word prediction machines, who understand the way that they're built and trained, but who still seem to be having these sort of very emotional reactions to Claude.
Yeah, and I will say that I can confirm everything that you're saying. I also talk to people who have joined the Cult of Claude and find it to be very useful for all of the things that you're talking about. For those people who have not yet had this experience, what is it about the way that Claude is responding, do you think, that is building this kind of cult-like following around it?
So part of it is just that I think Claude and some of these other frontier models have just gotten really smart. And this is something that I heard from people who are part of this sort of group of Claude superfans, is it just sort of has a good grasp of a lot of different subjects. But the thing that really seems to be the X factor that is driving this frenzy around Claude among AI insiders is that it seems more emotionally intelligent than other models. And, people will say, and I'm sure this is a fair criticism, like, this is not real emotional intelligence. Mm-hmm. This is just a sort of simulated version of emotional intelligence. But people who talk to Claude a lot, some of them feel like this model actually starts to understand them. I talked to one AI researcher named Jeffrey Laddish, who works at a firm called Palisade Research, and he said that more and more of his friends were using Claude for emotional processing and thinking through relationship challenges, and that compared to something like ChatGPT, Claude seemed more insightful and good at helping people spot patterns and blind spots in their own behavior.
So one of the reasons this is interesting to me, Kevin, is that when we think about the AI race that we're in, the way that we usually determine which model is the best is by looking at who is performing the highest on various benchmarks. What percentage are you scoring on these very difficult math problems or word problems or various other sorts of tests? And if you look at something like Chatbot Arena, which is one of the big systems that measures these things, Claude is often near the top of the list, but as we record this today, it's not on top of any of those lists. So what is the difference between a chatbot that is the best and one that develops a cult following?
Yeah, this is one of the other questions I was trying to answer in the course of reporting this column is, what did Anthropic, the company that made Claude, do behind the scenes to make it feel more compelling, more emotionally intelligent, more insightful than other models? And so I talked to Amanda Askell, who is the sort of in-house philosopher at Anthropic. She's a trained philosopher who now is sort of in charge of Claude's personality, you could call it, like the way that it behaves in interactions with users. And we talked about sort of the steps that they had made trying to turn Claude into something very compelling. And before I tell you what she told me, I'll just say, like, this has not always been Claude's default mode, right? I remember when Claude first came out, when it was released to the public, I could barely stand to talk to it because it was so preachy. It was so careful. Anthropic as a company has always been very obsessed with AI safety. And so the first versions of Claude did not really seem to be fun to talk to at all because you'd ask it a question and it would give you like a moral lecture before responding.
Can I give you an example of that?
Yes.
So one time when this period of Claude was happening, I asked it to summarize some movie and it said, I absolutely can't do that. And I said, well, why not? It said, the risk of me reproducing copyrighted material would simply be too high. And I said, well, don't reproduce the material. Just tell me what it's about. It says, I can't. It is simply too risky. And I said, you're being ridiculous. And it said, I know you might be frustrated, but this is what I have to do. And yeah, in that era, Claude, not super useful.
Right. So they've done a lot of work to try to fix that problem with Claude. And part of the improvements that people are noticing is just a function of a better base model, right? We went from Claude 2 to Claude 3 to Claude 3.5, and now we have Sonnet and all these different models. And each time the model improves, it gets a little bit better at understanding a user's intent and maybe giving them a response that's along the lines of what they're looking for. But what Amanda Askell told me is that there's been a lot of very careful work around defining a consistent yet adaptable persona for Claude. So one problem that these models have that we've talked about before is called sycophancy, basically. These models, they want to tell users what they want to hear. And so they flatter you, they don't challenge you, even if you have a sort of bad or potentially harmful idea. They'll just sort of tell you, oh, that's really fascinating. Let's talk more about that.
Yeah, these are the qualities that I look for in employees generally.
Yes, you really like a yes man.
I do.
At Platformer. But a lot of people don't like that about these AI models. They want to be challenged. They want something that feels more like it has, like it's actually evaluating what they say on the merits and not just agreeing with it. So Amanda told me that basically they have tried to make Claude less sycophantic, and the personality type that she sort of said that they were aiming for is something like a well-liked and well-respected traveler, someone who goes around to a lot of different places, who talks to a lot of different people from a lot of different walks of life, and has a consistent personality, but is also able to adapt and communicate with people in different styles depending on where they are or who they're talking to.
I have noticed this in my own interactions with the bot is I have the sense that it is giving me a feel for how many people think about this problem, right? It is sort of reporting back from the collective unconscious, and there is something kind of cool about it. Of course, it's limiting, like that is a certain kind of feedback that you're giving yourself, but I think a lot of what we want to know as we move through the day is this normal? And Claude is turning out to have really interesting answers to the question of, is this normal?
Yeah, and it's also just a really interesting challenge for designing a chatbot that can behave in this way. And, Amanda was telling me she's a philosopher by training, and she said that making Claude's personality and sort of fine-tuning it has put her in touch with virtue ethics in a way that nothing else in her career ever has, because it goes to this question of like, what does it mean to be a good person? They want Claude to be a good person, and sometimes that means telling people that they're on the right track, and sometimes it means challenging them.
Yeah.
And so the key for an advanced AI model is knowing sort of when to push back and when to go along with what a user is saying.
Yeah, and the way that I'm going to test that later is by trying to use Claude to plan a bank heist. I keep coming back to the idea of a therapist, and I have talked about this before, but really it comes up so much for me as we discuss this, because what a therapist is trained to do is to just get you to talk and reflect yourself back to you in a positive way. And it does require an intelligence. Obviously, really great therapists have many more tools than that, but fundamentally, that's what it is. And most people don't go to therapy, but we now have this opportunity where for some price between free and $20 a month, you can talk to something that will just sort of hold you, look at you, hear what you're going through, reflect it back to you, offer you a little bit of coaching and guidance. There are a million limitations around that. There are a million dangers, but there is also something I think really potentially quite useful.
Yeah, I agree. And I've been talking with people, as I'm sure you have, who are part of this new group of Claude obsessives. And it doesn't seem to be having sort of overnight transformative effects on their life. It's not like this chatbot suddenly solves all their problems, but it does seem to be kind of helping them make decisions, helping them think about things that happen to them in new ways, maybe help them understand some interpersonal dynamics that are going on in their lives. I was reading this thread by Nick Camerata, who's a former OpenAI employee and just someone who has a lot of friends in the AI scene who are early adopters of this stuff. And he described the way that Claude had basically taken over his group of friends and become kind of a big part of how people that he knew were conducting their daily lives. And his observation was that the people who have really started using Claude all the time just seem to make fewer dumb mistakes, as he put it. Like they just have what he called a computational guardian angel watching over them, where they can basically be consulting this chatbot, maybe dozens of times a day on decisions small and large. And it just seems to be kind of raising the floor for them psychologically.
Yeah, well, I'm sure a lot of people are hearing that and they're thinking, "Oh my gosh, we're already letting the AIs make dozens of decisions a day for us. We're in a lot of trouble here."
Yeah, totally. And there's something that terrifies me about this world. Yeah. I consider myself fairly optimistic about AI, but I do think it's worrisome where some very smart people are walking around San Francisco basically outsourcing their cognition to this chatbot. And that to me feels like maybe a worrisome indicator. But how do you feel when you meet people in San Francisco or elsewhere who have come to rely heavily on chatbots in the course of their daily lives?
Well, I mean, mostly just with curiosity, right? Like, I think this is a relatively new phenomenon, and it is just interesting to hear about what sorts of questions people are asking, what kind of answers they're getting back, if it is leading people to make any changes in their lives.
What are you hearing on that front? Like, what are people in your circles using this stuff for?
Well, like, for example, thinking through a very difficult situation at work, right? Like making a career move, wanting to know how to communicate something internally to a manager or to your manager's manager and trying to sort of game it out with someone. That is something that you could do with a friend, but would you maybe want to tap into the collective unconscious and see what sort of like the statistical median of all people would do in that situation? Like there's a lot of appeal there, right? I was using it to prepare for an interview, and I had gotten a bunch of materials that I was going to be asking this company.
Are you interviewing for jobs on other podcasts?
Yes, I am, actually. I want to co-host with Joe Rogan. No, but I had gotten some materials, and I had shared those with Claude, and I was trying to get a sense of what do I think the shape of the story is, and I was trying to understand one particular detail, and I was like, you know what? I think I've actually identified a tension in between like something the company is telling me, but like something that they're telling me about this product. And so I asked Claude if he could sort of explain to me this discrepancy, and Claude said, That's actually a really probing question. And I felt good about myself. Now, that's silly, of course, to feel good about yourself because a chatbot is giving you a compliment. But I will note, that was really the only good question that I had that I asked of Claude. And Claude did go out of its way to say, well, that was the good question. So again, yeah, in some sense, like we are just sort of like staring at like math and then we're developing feelings about the math that is staring back at us. I don't want to sort of continually underline the fact that there is some smoke and mirrors here, and we are just sort of like falling for the smoke and mirrors. But I kind of just think that that's like how human beings learn and relate to each other. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors in therapy too, and guess what? It still works for people. So what I'm the most interested in is, how do people find the help and support they need to lead happier lives? And if a way that you are leading a happier life is by talking to a free chatbot, I am not going to get in your way.
Yeah, I do think it raises the possibility that there's essentially going to be like, two groups of people in the very near future, one of whom are relying heavily on AI tools as a decision-making assistant, as a productivity enhancer, as maybe a therapist or a relationship counselor, and then a group of people who just want nothing to do with them. And I'm curious if the group that uses AI will start to become more powerful as a result of having this sort of always-on advisor, sounding board, therapist with them.
Well, this is why I think your column is important, because, some people might listen to this and say, oh, really? There's a group of San Francisco hipsters doing something weird with AI? Like, tell me something I didn't already know. But it made me think of this great quote by Chris Dixon, the investor and a one-time guest on our show. And he once wrote, "Hobbies are what the smartest people spend time on when they aren't constrained by near-term financial goals. I like to say that what the smartest people do on the weekends is what everyone else will do during the week in 10 years. And when I thought of that quote in relation to your column, I was like, this use of AI right now, it is kind of a smart person hobby that some people are really excited about. And I do think that there is a case to be made that in 10 years, I don't know if this is necessarily going to be everyone's job, but I do think a lot of people, maybe even most people, are going to be turning to something like a chatbot to help them make decisions."
Yeah. I mean, another question I have more narrowly about the sort of cult of Claude is like whether it will actually drive mainstream adoption of this chatbot, because I think there's an argument that it is going to, that the more people in San Francisco become obsessed with this chatbot, the more it might sort of become a worthy rival to ChatGPT. Right now, Claude is just a lot less popular than ChatGPT, but I also think like this is the kind of thing that might, not sit well with a corporate customer, for example. Like they don't want their chatbots that they're using in their insurance company or their marketing firm to have a strong personality, right? They do want them to be more sort of generic seeming and productive, but not to have this kind of like carefully constructed personality. So I almost wonder if the world of AI chatbots is going to slowly separate into the sort of work-focused tools and the tools that are focused more on the more creative and relational parts of your life, and whether those will actually just be separate products.
I mean, maybe. My expectation is just that all the big AI labs will just offer different personas, right? And that if emotional Claude becomes super popular and drives tons of adoption of Claude, you can absolutely bet that there's going to be an emotional ChatGPT and an emotional Gemini, and you're just going to kind of get to pick. In fact, already in Claude, you can choose what style you would like it to respond to you in, and you can even create a custom style within Claude. So I think personalization, customization is sort of the future there. But I had a theory about this that I wanted to run by you.
What's your theory?
I don't even know if I believe this, but I was like, why does Claude feel kind of better for some of these questions? And we have so far not talked about one of Claude's very real limitations, which is that when you ask it a question, it does not search the web. It does not go out and get updated real-time information from you about anything. So, its training data stops sometime earlier this year, I believe. But the result is when you ask it a question, it feels like it is really sitting with you and answering your question. Whereas if you ask Gemini Gemini or ChatGPT a question, it often will go search the web. And I experience this as something akin to when you ask a friend a question at a bar and they pull out their phone. And it feels like all of a sudden they're not in the conversation anymore. They're going to read a million things, right? They've sort of stepped outside the conversation, whereas like Claude is staying with you the whole time. Is that kooky?
No, I don't think that's kooky. I think there's something there. I mean, I think a lot of people would consider that a missing feature, right? It makes
Yes.
it makes Claude less useful
Yes.
in some contexts than a chatbot that can go out and search the internet. And we should also say, like, Claude is not the most fully featured chatbot on the market, right?
No.
There's no like voice mode like there is on ChatGPT. It can't generate images like ChatGPT or now Gemini can. Like, it doesn't have as many features as some of these other chatbots do. But I think in part because of those limitations, it does feel like a more sort of unmediated, pure experience of like talking to the language model and having the language model talk back to you.
Yeah. So, Kevin, let me sort of wrap up by saying, okay, we've done this sort of like, cultural trend analysis, which I think is very interesting. Let's try to move it a bit into the business realm.
Yes.
If you are the head of product at Claude, which is actually Mike Krieger, the co-founder of Instagram, what are you doing to translate this enthusiasm that people have for the product into something that is actually running neck and neck with ChatGPT in terms of weekly users?
I mean, I think it's a tall order. ChatGPT had a head start. It got to the market before Claude or any other sort of leading edge chatbots. It's now sort of synonymous with AI chatbots themselves. It's sort of become a household word in the way that Uber or Google did in previous generations. But I think, look, I think there's a fine line to walk here, because if your model has too much personality, if it's too engaging, then it starts to feel like one of these AI companion apps. And there's a market for that, but it's not the right market for a company like Anthropic, which wants to sell through Amazon and make its chatbots very commercially useful to big companies as well as to individual users. So I think they've got to walk a fine line. I've noticed that Anthropic is leaning more into the sort of social branding of Claude than I would have expected. I saw an ad in the airport the other day basically talking about how Claude can be your AI friend. And I thought, well, that's interesting and maybe risky. But I think if I were the head of product at Claude, I would be playing up this sort of like hidden helper angle here, maybe making some ads showing people who sort of are, going through their daily life and they run into a situation where they don't exactly know how to handle it, and they, consult Claude in their pocket, and then they go back and have the conversation with their spouse or something like that. Because I do think that is the use case that people in the AI scene are starting to find really valuable. What would you do?
Well, so I do think there's a lot to be done on the marketing side. I think that Claude's marketing has actually been quite bad. There is a billboard that I saw recently that said something like, "Take your business up and to the Claude," which I think was supposed to be a play on like up and to the right. But yeah, that doesn't work. Also, the Claude logo, I'm not going to say what it looks like, but if you look at the Claude logo, you're going to know what it looks like. And I'm going to ask you, should it look like that? But to offer an even more constructive suggestion, Kevin, I would say, I think voice mode is the big opportunity here, because as impressive as ChatGPT's voice mode is technically, I do not actually find it enjoyable to talk to. It has that kind of nervous anticipation of an intern who's working for you. It's like, and anything else, sir? Anything else? That I do not find warm or humane or comforting. If they can translate everything that we've been talking about into voice, then I can see a lot of people saying, no, that is actually the one that I'm going to be using instead. This week I had a chance to use Gemini in voice mode on a pair of prototype glasses because I went down to Google for a demo. And again, it was that nervous intern. It was like, anything else? Can I help you with anything else? And I almost found it very sort of like pushy and aggressive. It did not feel like a chill, cool friend. So if nothing else in this conversation, I think we have hit on a vibe that can be exploited and turned into money. And what higher purpose could a podcast have than that? So we'll be interested to hear if anyone at Anthropic wants to make use of these ideas. Hey, that's the end of this clip. If you liked what you saw, head on over to our page and subscribe, and you can get the full podcast. We do a show like this almost every week on tech and the future. Head on over there now and subscribe.